everybody. This is Floyd Gibbons speaking, and my job here today is one that I approach with fear and reverence. It is to tell the story of one of America's greatest sons, a story illustrated by the actual record of realism as the motion picture camera caught this great man in America and in Europe during one of the most thrilling and stirring periods of world history. This great American was Woodrow Wilson. Now, his personal physician and his friend is the man who has helped me and assisted me in this great work. He was with Wilson at the height of his career. He was with him upon his retirement from public office. He was with him during his illness and his collapse, and he was with him at his death. I am here in Washington, D.C. today at the home of this man just to thank him for the great assistance that he has rendered. And here he is, Admiral Cary T. Grayson.
Hello, Floyd. How is the work progressing, and is the film assembled?
Admiral Grayson, I'm glad to report to you, sir, that the film is complete, thanks to the wonderful assistance that you have given to make this important work possible.
It's mighty pleasing to me to learn that the great and enduring memory of my late chief, Woodrow Wilson, is being perpetuated for future generations through the medium of the screen and sound reproduction. In this effort, I believe you've succeeded, and you have my sincere congratulations.
Admiral Grayson, thank you very, very much for that.
You remember the anxiety in the White House on that first day of April 1917 when Woodrow Wilson faced the great responsibility, the great decision to lead 120 million peaceful Americans into war? Through long nights of worry in the White House, Wilson, who loved peace, has struggled with his problem under the ever-gathering war clouds. The lonely man in the White House conferred with his cabinet. It is a fearful thing, he said, to lead our people into war, but right is more precious than peace. That was the great decision. Under the Capitol's great white dome, he advised Congress to declare the recent course of the Imperial German government nothing less than war against the peoples of the United States. He said, America is privileged to spend her blood for the principles that gave her birth and the peace she has treasured, God helping her. She can do no other. Immortal words. On April the 6th, President Wilson signed the proclamation of the existence of a state of war with the Imperial German government. To arms, it was a call that shook the nation. War, the headlines scream. Men grab the papers. Women hear and shudder. Whistles blow. Bells ring. Crowds gather. Recruiting starts. Bands blare. And thousands cheer. Flags appear. The call is answered by the manpower of the nation. And at their head marches Woodrow Wilson, virile, erect, vigorous, confident in the destiny of the great decision. And from every corner of the country came America's sons to back up the command of their great leader, if need be, with their lives. To the seaboard, on board the transports, to face 3,000 miles of submarine-infested ocean. It is the mightiest armed force that ever crossed an ocean. 3 million bayonets charged against militarism and a war-mad Kaiser. In ships painted with strange designs to confuse the enemy, they sail away to ports unknown, 50,000 of them never to see home again. American and British warships escort the troops. Watchers aloft spot an enemy periscope, and word carried below is flashed by radio. The big guns open fire from long range with billows of orange-colored flame and clouds of smoke, while closer at hand, destroyers speeding over the spot drop depth bombs, sending the submarine to the bottom and bringing black oil to the surface to prove the destruction. Safely across the Atlantic, a rough trip too, they land in France long before the enemy dreamed it possible. They are crusaders against all war. They go to prove that right shall prevail over might. In a strange but friendly land, they are herded in cattle cars for that jolting ride to the war zone. Few of them are trained soldiers. They are men and boys from every civilian walk of life. Under the bombs of enemy planes, they make the long march through war's ruin to the front. Railroad guns hurl heavy shells on enemy targets 10 miles away. Lighter field pieces blast the way for our men at Cantigny, Chateau Thierry, and Belleau Wood. The men behind the guns lay down curtains of fire, behind which Allied infantry advanced across wheat fields that bristled with death. After 3 years stationary warfare, it is now the Allied and American lines that move, and the direction is forward, toward victory. Eager machine gun squads push on to new positions. In those October battles of the Meuse Argonne, the largest army that ever fought under the American flag followed barrages of bursting shells, raining on the enemy. Each foot of ground advance costs dearly, but every noble sacrifice drives home the great decision. The guns advance their range, and large shells explode far behind the enemy lines, speed the end of this war. To end war, giant howitzers squatting like ugly frogs blast the way to victory, symbolized by the lines of weary prisoners marching back from the blazing front. The war is over for them, and also for the Allied crusaders against all war. The last shell fired in hate was at 11 o'clock on the morning of November the 11th, 1918. It was fired by just one little group of the millions that laid down arms that day and said, "Thank God, it is over." That prayer of thanksgiving is echoed around the world. In Paris, in London, Rome, Berlin, the crowds in New York are delirious with joy. And in Washington, rejoicing thousands greet the armistice with cheers. But now to make this peace permanent, and so the President's flag flies from the masthead of the steamer George Washington as it sails to Europe upon the greatest humanitarian mission ever undertaken. Mrs. Wilson goes with the President. His words and the ideal behind the great decision have preceded him. His praise is sung around the world. The people of war-weary Europe await him as a savior. He goes not for glory or gain, either for himself or for his country, but rather as the great humanitarian, determined upon a square deal for all the nations, big and small, friend and foe alike. His aim is to save them and the world from the folly of future wars. He is the first American president to set foot in Europe during his term of office. Paris welcomes him. The streets are gay with bunting, his name on every lip. Thousands line the sides of the broad avenue Champs-Élysées as his carriage comes around the Arc de Triomphe. Wilson rides on the right of President Poincaré of France, while Mrs. Wilson and Madame Poincaré follow in a flower-filled carriage. The wide expanse of the Place de la Concorde is blocked with cheering masses of citizenry and soldiery as Paris, capital of the Allied world, takes Wilson to her arms. The people of England call, and he crosses the English Channel. Mrs. Wilson is with him, and also Admiral Grayson, friend and physician, ever watchful of the man who has become the spokesman of the Allied world and for whose health he is responsible. It is the first time those historic waters have been crossed by an American president. The King, monarch of the British Empire, greets his guest, the president of the greatest English-speaking republic, at the station in London. They ride side by side in an ancient coach of state. He is cheered through the streets of London town. This Yankee chieftain from across the sea has captured the imagination of the English people. And in Rome, he is welcomed by King Victor Emmanuel and acclaimed by the Italian people. King and Queen, noble and peasant, greet President and Mrs. Wilson with cheers of joy. The Eternal City acclaims his present-day warrior for peace. King Albert of the Belgians meets him at the frontiers of his kingdom. Mrs. Wilson walks with Queen Elizabeth between ranks of Belgian veterans standing stiffly at the salute. And in Malines, the beloved Cardinal Mercier receives Wilson with a kindly benediction, while beyond the arches, the people acclaim him with cheers. Meanwhile, in Paris, Wilson has fought the fight of the people against diplomatic intrigue. He has won a place for his ideal, the League of Nations, in the peace treaty. He signs that document in the Hall of Mirrors, in the Palace of Versailles. Crowds outside the palace, in the garden, await long hours to catch just one glimpse of Clemenceau and Lloyd George and Wilson. Wilson, the maker of peace. He has won the people of Europe to the League of Nations, but his health is cracking under the strain, and now he returns to face an even greater struggle at home. Misunderstanding, discord, envy await him. Jealous rivals bend every effort toward undoing this great work. He tells returning veterans on the ship, "I come back with my heart full of enthusiasm for the preservation of this just peace to save the world from unnecessary bloodshed." The approaching shores of his homeland veil his destiny, the fate that ever awaits the returning prophet.
He has lost his health and all but given his life for the great cause which has now been pulled down into the mire of politics. Friends urge him to appeal to the hearts of his people. Grayson, his doctor, forbids a speaking tour. "It will kill you," he tells the president. Wilson, looking through that tall White House window out on the white shaft of Washington's monument, makes up his mind. He replies, "Grayson, old fellow, even though it may mean giving up my life, I will make the sacrifice to save the treaty." It is his death sentence. He plunges into the speaking tour, travels 8,000 miles in 20 days, makes 42 addresses, and then collapse.
His last 18 months as president were spent as an invalid in the White House. The inauguration ceremonies of his successor saw Wilson performing his final official act. The feeble veteran returns to private life. Callers at his home see that he is nearing the end. And 3 months later, February 3rd, 1924, men and women bare their heads and kneel in the street in front of that private home in Washington, D.C., where a great soul is passing. He died at 15 minutes after 11 o'clock that morning. Woodrow Wilson, the warrior against war, has taken his ideal to the highest tribunal. Flags at half-mast symbolize the nation's sorrow. The noble spires of the National Cathedral in Washington rise high above the tomb of Woodrow Wilson, the man who made the great decision and gave his life for his country and for humanity. His memory will never die. His name and his ideal will live forever in the hearts of all mankind.